Hello, everyone. Welcome to the American Center in Moscow's Makers of a Nation speaker program. My name is Pallavi Sen. I'm an artist based in Massachusetts, living and working between Massachusetts and New York. I'm an interdisciplinary artist and a professor of art at Williams College. And I have the great pleasure of talking and being in conversation with Olivia today, who is a baker and an artist based in Richmond, Virginia. And Olivia, before we start talking, I'm just going to introduce everybody briefly to your practice. So, Olivia was born and raised in the Shenandoah Valley and attended the French Culinary Institute in New York City and received a degree in Pastry Arts, which you can see in action right now on the screen. After graduating, she went on to work at Bouchon, per se, and the Inn at Little Washington. She spent some time learning about winemaking, working on a family run vineyard in Austria. Once she landed in Richmond, Virginia, she created a pastry and bread program at Metzger Bar and Butchery, and again at Brenner Pass in Richmond, Virginia. And then in early 2020, Olivia left the full time restaurant scene to focus on community driven initiatives and her own creative journey, which we will be learning about today. And alongside this, this business that Olivia has created, she also offers workshops, consultations, private dinners, meal prepping, and of course, and at the heart of it is custom cake making. When Olivia is not in the kitchen, she uses oil based pigments and natural pigments to make paintings on raw canvas. And right now, and she is working on methods of redirecting food waste into painting mediums. And she is inspired by her friends, the ocean, the desert, rocks, her dog, Dilla, farmers markets, jazz, and travel. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank
And
you for
maybe we will I would perhaps love for you to start at the very beginning. How did you what brought you to cakes, and how did this time begin for you?
So I started cooking pretty seriously when I was about 14 or 15. I always loved eating with my family, and it was the center of our celebrations and homes. So it was always around that. And in high school, I really didn't like school that much. I was kind of lost in trying to, find my people or find my thing. And I started cooking for my parents, like dinner every night. And I got into baking more specifically, I think, because it's so celebratory and ceremonial. So I just started making cakes for my family's birthday parties or whatever. And then I was a big advocate of our local market. And, there's so many farmers there, but also other vendors like bakers and people making homemade things or craftsmen. And I eventually started my own cake business when I was 16 years old, and I would sell every Saturday, and also working in local restaurants, when I wasn't in school. And I just started out small, just making, cupcakes and cakes, and really trying to utilize things that were growing around me. And I found inspiration just from that, from what was growing around me where I lived in the Shenandoah Valley, which is full of beautiful organic farms. And that's not really changed that much since I started. I'm now, 35, and I started when I was 16, and ingredients and seasonality local to me is the driving force for pretty much everything that I make. But cakes have become a way to highlight those things, but also I can make kind of a living with them as well.
So, I mean, I've had the pleasure of eating some of your cakes, and they are fantastic. And, I'd heard about you because of like all the different projects you'd been doing while I also lived in the same city, Richmond. So, could you actually, and for those, especially for people who are younger and beginning to think of what it might be like to enter this field, or what it takes to be this like 16-year-old who is, making cupcakes and selling cakes, what the arc of that is to now arrive here today where you are. Could you share with us maybe the kinds of jobs you held or the different experiences you had that, when you, with the privilege of looking back, you can see like this is how you got here?
Yeah, I think, now I do have a maybe rounded out picture that I'm kind of 2 decades into this career, and I've kind of done a lot of most parts of like hospitality or restaurant industry. I've really done most everything. I mean, there's always new things coming up, but everything from dishwashing to working the hotline, not just baking, but cooking steaks for people, private events, catering, and I am a self-employed artist and maker, so right now I still am taking odd jobs wherever to kind of fill in the pieces, because I don't have like a stable employer. I am the employer and the employee. So, it's constantly pushing forward and being available for something that someone might need, but also me working for another local chef who needs help with a wedding. And I will say it's a lot of continuing to piece things together. I'm not quite at a point where I just have, my income coming from one place, but I kind of like that. I find it a fun challenge. It can be a little bit stressful because, if you're not pushing yourself, no one else will, but I do enjoy doing a lot of different things at the same time, combining, having an art show or doing commissioned paintings for someone, as well as doing commissioned wedding cakes or having pop-ups or workshops. So kind of have my fingers in a lot of different places.
Yeah. Do you I remember you when we were chatting day before, you were telling me about and we, talked about in the very beginning, like the different restaurants you've worked at and the different kitchens you've been in. Were there any experiences that, especially in these kind of like intense environments, that really stuck with you and have shaped your work today?
Definitely. I was reflecting on this question earlier today, and so much of my kind of focus and the way I work now in painting or cakes or whatever is so shaped by my experience in professional kitchens at such a young age. I was working in very high-end stress restaurants when I was still like 18, 19, and a lot of traits that I think will be with me forever are, the sense of urgency to immediately start your task and finish it while you're also doing 10 other tasks. So like time management and time organization and multitasking and self-discipline are all things that I think will be with me for forever, which I'm very grateful for. While I was, that young and experiencing this, it was maybe a little intense, but ultimately I think really helped shape me into someone who can work alone and have a solitary career, but also I'm very team oriented because I worked in a restaurant. It is a team structure. So I can slip into other types of work environments or big catering gigs and be able to navigate it and feel like I'm contributing.
What do you, I guess we're looking at this like very large cake right now, and then there's this one. Um, how would you how would you define a cake to even, because yeah, what would you say makes is like kind of the start and end of it, or what would you definitely expect in making one?
So, in making one and eating a cake, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is layers. So, physical, visible layers, but also layers of texture, layers of flavor, and layers of colors.
Mm-hmm.
So, the kind of cakes I like to make are, again, inspired by seasonal things. I love to use lots of fruits in my cakes, either fresh or I do lots of preserving when they are fresh to make jams or compotes. And to me, what I think defines a wonderful cake is something that, of course, maybe excites you, right? Because it's an exciting time to have a whole cake and sometimes there's candles on it, but also something that makes you remember another wonderful time in your life. Maybe it's not the same flavors that you experienced, but it's doing that thing in your head where it's making you feel comfy and
Mm-hmm.
comfortable and like nostalgia a little bit.
And so I guess when you're thinking about flavor and its relationship to memory, of course you as the person making it, and that's, it's your set of emotion around like a specific palette or a set of flavors. How do you work now when you're baking for the purpose of like when it is a when it's beyond just like a private practice and it becomes something that is a business and you're working with others? How do you how do you work with the other person, the recipient, or the person that this person has in mind who has come to you? Maybe it's their mother or someone they love. How do you work with them to create the cake, and what is the process behind that like?
So for my custom cakes, I have a form that people fill out, and the questions are multiple answers are encouraged, but the questions are your favorite fruits, your favorite veggies, your favorite nuts, spices, flowers. And then in that, I also have fond food memories. So within that question alone, it really lets me understand where this person is coming from. And these food memories don't have to be sweet focused. They can be, my mom used to make this one type of casserole every, Friday night or something like that. And that informs me that somewhere in there they're thinking of family. And that does help shape the way I want to build the flavors. And when people fill out this form, I then develop 2 to 3 different flavor options. And for my cakes, for instance, this one I'm decorating now, this person ordered a cake to welcome her new baby, and she wanted it timed out as a cake to enjoy when she gave birth, which I think is incredible. So people order cakes for all different reasons, which I love. I love when people order a cake just for themselves, just because. That's my favorite. But this cake is 4 layers of toasted coconut cake with passion fruit olive oil curd, and inside are like miniature coconut macaroons. So they're like a little crunchy and chewy. And then a salty vanilla whip. And then the buttercream is a torched Swiss meringue buttercream that's vanilla. So it's definitely giving more tropical summery vibes. And then I'm decorating with fresh fruits, kiwis, and gooseberries. And then the buttercreams that I made, I will tint them. And this is tinted. It's kind of hard to see, but I try to tint with natural pigments as well. So the buttercreams are dyed with turmeric and beet powder to give a fun pink and yellow hue.
I think it's magical that also that this person has their birth time. And this is going
Don't touch
to,
it though.
yeah, but cakes last, which is good, so there's like a window of time, so
Yeah.
hopefully. So when I guess this is maybe related to how you just described. There are certain like words you use to like describe the kind, like you said curd or and whip, which is maybe the different, are these the different like creams in the layers between the cakes? And I have, I'm seeing more and more like there's a familiarity with the like language around cake that's also coming from um, maybe our exposure to Instagram and cake videos on Instagram. And we didn't talk about this separately, but I'm curious, how do you, because, well, one, I want to ask you, is social media an aspect of your business? Is it something that how do you work with it? That's one question. And then, are the kinds of trends that you are seeing, and also I guess you are becoming a part of what's like shaping these styles, is that something you are thinking about?
Yes, to the first question, social media, I think, is the most challenging part of my business. And it continues to get that way because so much is out of our control. It's kind of, the app has all the power. And I do feel like I have to be on there and be posting, consistently. And it's a struggle because if I'm not following kind of the trends of social media, my things won't get seen. And that's a whole other part of it where it's like, I'm not trying to make money being a content creator, but I do want my community that's around me to be able to see what I'm posting, if it's about holiday specials or upcoming pop-ups. And I try to keep up with Substack, which is again another platform. But yes, I mean, social media is 100% like a very big part of having a small business. And it's been wonderful. And I've also found a really lovely community of other bakers on there that we can kind of knowledge share and have some support if we need it. But it has been interesting. And I wrote about this, I think, in my first Substack post, that I've been making very similar cakes. Like my style, it hasn't changed that much from when I first started when I was a teenager, because it's not really trendy. I mean, I've seen this become a trend, but I've always just decorated with, these are a bunch of cherry blossoms and tulips and things that are growing around me. So my style really has just been tied into what's growing around me. But then back in 2020, we started to see a lot of people who were laid off during COVID, and a lot of people who were laid off were pastry chefs, because they're kind of the first to go in restaurants, because they're seen as more of a luxury, and it's sometimes people don't see the added value to having a pastry chef or baker in a restaurant setting. So then a lot of these pastry chefs were starting cake businesses at home, and it really blew up. And I think, I mean, it's to have, I'm so happy that people have found like a second career out of it and don't have to feel the pressure to go back into the restaurant industry, because it is tough. But it has been interesting seeing this whole thing kind of blow up that I had already been for a while, and then seeing how just the social media part of it has like morphed it into this whole other thing. It's been interesting, and it's hard to feel like, you want to keep up with things, but I also want to stay true to my voice and my style, and not feel pressured to do it just to stay relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand this. I understand this feeling, because sometimes, when in my own practice, when I'm making something, it's almost as if I can, even before it's done, I can imagine it on a screen. Or I make things very often with the assumption that, oh, someone's going to see it, and it's like almost as if a private practice has disappeared, or like a privacy of your creative world disappears, because you're always, at least many of us, are thinking about how it will be seen. And actually, this makes me think about your paintings, which I feel I see, maybe seem cl- maybe seem uh, as if they have like another place perhaps in your life, or in how you map out your days. And I would actually love to hear, I would also love to ask you how, so you know, we know you through your cakes, but you also have a really vibrant practice in painting. um could you maybe could you start us off maybe from the very beginning of it? Like, how did you become interested in painting, and what does it look like in your life now?
I got into painting. I mean, I grew up in a really creative household. My mom was an art teacher for 30 plus years, and there was always projects available to us, and always welcome to make a mess in the, in the basement or whatever. And so it was always around, but I never took painting lessons in high school. I was already focused on baking and cooking, but by the time I was working at the Inn at Little Washington, I was living alone. I was 19. I was working, 14, 16 plus hour days in a very, very high stress environment. But then I was living in the country on like 25 acres of rolling hills, and it was very mystical. And I really loved it being there, having moved from New York City. So I was inspired by that, but I think I needed an outlet outside of cooking, some downtime when I would come home late at night and just be able to continue. I had busy hands, so I wanted to keep them moving. And I just got some canvases, and I started with acrylic paints, but I didn't really love that medium. But I did feel, once I was just getting paint onto a canvas, I felt like something had clicked in me in terms of another way to express whatever is inside of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I was able to experiment, and I gave myself permission to really do whatever. And I started getting into oil paints and raw canvas, just having mostly been so inspired by Helen Frankenthaler is a big one, and Lee Krasner. But the way Helen paints with just more staining the canvas, I found really moving, and I loved how it was very physical. And that's kind of where my practice continues from today. And I think, just being in the kitchen all the time, I'm really exposed to so much vibrancy and colors. And you also, you have a side towel, and you have to clean up your mess. And a lot of times, you'll see your side towel stained from some material that you worked with, be it coffee or tea, or turmeric is a big one, or beets, like cutting a bunch of raw beets. Your cutting board is stained, bright red. And I think just subconsciously that's where that came from in terms of wanting to work with natural dyes more. And I just started making making my own pigments with stuff I had in my kitchen, and then doing a little bit of research. I haven't taken any serious classes. I've done a small workshop with a local person here who does naturally dyed clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely learned a little bit about things, and how to make my own pigments. But something that's very beautiful about this process is it's so personal, because it's so directed by what is growing around you. Again, the theme keeps coming up, I feel, the more I'm talking. But depending on what turmeric I get here, and the way my water is made up of, that's different than someone else making a turmeric based pigment, thousands of miles away. So learning about this really is just by doing and experimenting, and it's like ever evolving, which is exciting.
I think what you're saying also makes me think about perhaps maybe, and this was how much of life was like maybe several decades ago, was that, of seasonal eating and seasonal experiences, and having a color palette of exactly what is growing around you right now, what's available through trade right now, and it changing as the months go. And it's really it's very grounding to be able to find that again in the 21st century, when you do have the option of getting any kind of any pigment you want, any color you want, whenever you want it. um could you, maybe, I guess, could you walk us through s- a scene or a day in your kitchen where, when you're making something, let's say you're making a kind of, you're making baking something or you're cooking something, and then how that might translate. And we have this photo here of like a couple different, traditional natural dyes, but then also I know you mentioned that you sometimes use food waste. So what does that look like if we were to imagine that with you?
So, I mean, I really am cooking every day, all the time. It is my form of, work, but then it's also like relaxing, and then also we have to feed ourselves. So it fills so many holes in my day, or takes up all the holes, I guess you should say. But I always have some some sort of evolving project going on. One, I brought some dyes here. This is um, marigold petals, and I had a jar that I had dried, and I grew them. I grew the marigolds in my garden, and I try to grow most of all the flowers, like all the flowers here that I'll be decorating the cake with are flowers I grew, and they are edible also. And but I had grown the marigolds last fall, and I dried them, knowing that I would use the petals for either decorating a cake or that I could use them to make a dye. And as I'm working on paintings, I kind of just start rifling through my cabinets where there's most likely some sort of plant that I've set aside. But then, this is just yellow onion skins. And, what did I cook? I don't know, made something with onions. And, I compost, but sometimes it's like, well, I know this will make a little, like a jar of pigment. So I'll just set that aside and kind of make either like a sun tea with it, where I'll just pour water over it and set it in a sunny spot for a few days, and then see what it's like. Maybe it needs to sit longer. Maybe I need to add more materials to it to darken it. But it's all very, I'm finding that it is all very connected if I'm intentional about materials that are around me, especially if I'm growing them. And it's how to give, just like 5 marigolds, not that many, but how can I give them the most life possible, because
Mhm.
they gave us so much life by growing.
Do you mentioned that it sounds like you are very experimental with how you're working, and it's what you have. One of the maybe one of the, as a child, I remember one of the saddest things I realized were like how fugitive certain colors can be. Like you can have beetroot, which is like this bright pink, and then when it dries on paper it becomes like browner and browner. um, do you have and I'm looking at this image which I love, like how the yellow is blooming from inside the red here. Do you have recipes that you look at for making dyes, or specific traditions, local traditions, or are you kind of teaching yourself mainly through experimentation, or a combination? How do you approach like finding a color or working with a color?
I do feel right now I'm just very experimental. I have read, I've read some articles and some books, and there's lots of videos online of people doing natural dyes. I guess I haven't found specifically the way I'm working and I'm sure there's multiple people, hundreds of people, thousands of people who are also working in this medium of using natural dyes on canvas. But I do think it is so experimental, just the practice itself. I don't have any recipes. I mean, I guess I kind of do. I work within, I guess it would be, 8 to 16 ounces, just because that's the jar size I have. And I typically won't use, if that, or if more. So I work, in small amounts of liquid. And the picture that, you'd seen before, those were just little 8-ounce pint containers. And that, with this painting that's shown now, those amount of pigments got me through painting that whole big piece, which is about, I guess it was like 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. And then the peaches, so 4. It got me through the whole show that I had to do, which was very exciting to see exactly like how much I could get with the pigments that I made.
Actually, at this point, it would also be really lovely. There's a video that you shared earlier of like how, like a color interaction, and maybe if we can pull that up, and if you could also kind of walk us through what's happening over here.
So, while in one workshop that I did do, we were able to experiment with iron and acid as fixers. So the colors that are on that were freshly poured is hibiscus and oak gall. And I squeezed the lemon on there in order to just get little bursts and also to brighten it up. And that's just interacting with the hibiscus and then the iron. And again, this is pretty experimental because there's multiple things happening at the same time. It's like 3 different pigments that have blended together. But I did know that with lemon and hibiscus, a bright purple will emerge rather than like a magenta color that usually you get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and alum would also do the same thing. Like I made a pigment yesterday that is hibiscus tea, and then I added like powdered aluminum sulfate, which can be used as a mordant for like natural dyeing. But the color that I got this painting I'm working on now is, again, hard to see the colors, but it's very purple. It's like grape soda purple. And then I made a cabbage dye last night, which is this faint color. And to your point, these are, you said called them fugitive colors. And as I'm working on pieces, it's interesting to see what happens to them. Do they fade? They hold some sort of color. And then I think that's when I incorporate my oils. So some things are completely just all natural, but then sometimes I will add in some oil paints. But other traditional dyes that I use that, I use cochineal, which is a bright pink hue, and also madder root, and those hold very well. So when those are kind of incorporated with some of the other natural pigments that I made from plants and such, an interesting thing will happen because they'll take on some of the colors that were there, but kind of prolong their life a little bit more.
So this, I mean, I think it's like so exciting to what I find really exciting about natural dyes is really how much like local chemistry is happening with it, and also, yes, like all the things, like what's right outside, what you have at hand, what can modify it, what can change it, how it might change over a certain time period. And I love how you are combining this with then these stable colors that that can like predictably stay one way. And it's nice to have the it's nice also for the person receiving it to know that there are some stable elements, and there are others that might shift or move. And I wonder, especially since it seems like you're working with ephemeral things on both in both parts of, or in the ways that you work, you are working with like an ephemeral quality. Has your experimentation with pigments and kind of learning it in real time, has it affected the way that you bake or work with color or composition in your cakes? And it doesn't have to be like, I don't mean just visually, but even kind of psychologically with the risk or with the experimentation. Do these practices kind of inform each other?
Yes, I definitely think so. And I think, one season that is my favorite, but also I find the most challenging is summer here in Virginia, specifically July. There's so much growing, like so many beautiful things growing that I am like racing to preserve because I know I'm not going to be able to get to them all at this, in order to highlight them the way that I would like to highlight them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially with, fresh fruit that are very delicate and finicky, like raspberries here are so beautiful, but if you don't eat them right away, they they shrivel up and they turn into mush. But I definitely, in terms of the painting with kind of the ephemeral qualities, I've seen the effects, when you have a naturally dyed t-shirt after washing it, how it really fades. But I've had some paintings that have been painted with, mostly natural plant-based pigments that I've made, as well as cochineal. And it was in a restaurant for like 3 years. And so it's going on its 4th year now. And it really looks lovely. It might be like slightly muted. But, people who get these paintings, it is clear that like it might change a little bit. And that's not for everyone. I totally understand that. But I don't know. I find it kind of fun because I feel like we should be listening to nature more, and it's one way to force yourself to do that, I guess.
Yeah, this is making me think about. I worked with a couple of natural dyers in India a few summers ago, and there are definitely colors. For example, when you use turmeric to dye a fabric yellow, it will fade over time, but it's very typical to basically just dip it again every so many years because it's not like a one and done, but something that you perhaps keep going back to or you over dye, and it's like changing the expectation of what something will be after you have it.
Yes, that's so cool. And also I think that adds to another point of, giving things more life if they're
Mhm.
not completely in shambles. It's like if this piece of fabric or this curtain or whatever is still in good shape, it just needs like a boost, just dye it again or, stitch something on top of it rather than, throwing it into the trash pile. I think there's always ways to elongate the life of art or any sort of, textile.
Yeah. We have about 5 more minutes, and I have a couple more questions for you. But I would also like all who are listening, if you have questions, of course you can, we can field them in the end. But if you would like to send them to us right now, that's also absolutely fine, as some of you already have. Um, Olivia, one thing that I know really was so perplexing to me when I was younger, when I was starting out, was it just seemed like a creative life seemed basically like a miracle, and like completely, like who knows how we get there, because not most artists may not have, for parents they may not have artists who've done the same thing, and most people may not have in their family somebody who's who's an entrepreneur and is making a variety of jobs, a variety of like projects work for them as their livelihood. W- what would you tell your younger self, or perhaps any young person who is here, who is feeling pulled towards a career that is not so defined, like perhaps not an office job, but something that is made up of all these parts, what would you tell what would you tell young Olivia?
I mean, I think just to like keep doing it, I think it's hard because, we do have to pay our bills, right? And like pay for our housing and these things to keep us alive and healthy. But it doesn't mean you have to dedicate your whole life to making money in a way that society has told you is the safest way. I think honestly now I kind of feel a little bit vindicated. I don't know about you, but the way that we're seeing just how unsafe some of these corporate jobs or other careers that we were told is the safe route to be an adult, we're learning that no one's really protecting those people, and it really is just all up to you. So why not do what you want to do? And there's always ways to make money in multiple different jobs. I think understanding that you might have to work like a few different types of gigs in order to have a creative life is helpful. I think there's some people out there who are able to only make art and that's all they do. But I think that might be in my mind a little bit unrealistic. But at the same time, I am really mostly making art. I have the occasional job that, I don't want to do or whatever, but knowing that it's supplementing ultimately the life I want to lead I'm able to like compromise and find that balance.
Mm-hmm. That, I mean, I think that's a really, really, that's so helpful. Another question I have for you, and this is something I work with a lot of young people, and I often hear them asking is really, when you are, let's say, when you're beginning a cake or when you're beginning a painting, maybe especially when you feel like you have no ideas at all, where do you begin? How do you begin?
Yeah, I definitely go through phases of feeling burnt out. I think more than anything, I think I am in a constant state of creating in all forms of my life. And sometimes I need to like not try to make anything great. I think sometimes I just have to like make dinner or just make something that is familiar to me that I know is going to bring me comfort. And
Mhm.
sometimes that's just like scribbling on a pad with charcoal that ends up completely covered in nonsense. But I think allow yourself to be uncreative and not put the pressure on yourself to like make a masterpiece every single
Mhm.
time, I think is important because it's clear that if you are creative, something just constantly needs to be moving out of you. But allow yourself some grace to make something that no one else needs to see, or it's, kindling for a fire or something.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes, to kind of stay in motion.
Yeah,
Um,
I think moving forward helps. I think if you do need to just go inward and hibernate, do that too. I think just not giving yourself grace, I think, is overall what I would say, and something I'm trying to work on as well.
for people who are interested in natural dyes, and of course, we are talking to people in a completely different climate and like a different geographies. Where would you recommend that people start?
I think just looking in your pantry. I think just look in your house. Don't before you try to order something online or go to the store. I think just look around your house, look in your garden, and just see what you have. And if it looks like an alarmingly deep, rich, pungent color, then look it up. But I think just looking around, and I think some of the very like basic forms and things that people have been using for forever are tea and coffee. And I think in every house those exist for the most part.
Mhm.
And those are ways to make pigments that you can just start doing watercoloring with a neutral color and see how you like it, and you can expand from there.
Before we and thank you for that. Before we open up for questions, I have one last question for you, which is what are I guess what are some projects that are developing for you? What's coming up for you in the coming months or season?
I've been very excited when I'm thinking about textiles. When I was younger, I was very into sewing and thought I wanted to be a fashion designer. And I would make, purses for my schoolmates and that kind of thing. And I've held on to my sewing machine, and I love I love it, and I just haven't been around it very often. But I have, I think a lot of us have mending piles in our house of like shirts that have a hole in them or jeans that don't fit anymore. And sometimes you can't always donate it. And trying to limit my trash, interested in how I can make surfaces to either paint on or stitch on with fabrics that I already have, or that are, at the scrap store near me that sells, just random pieces of fabric. I'm interested in combining those with doing my natural pigments, or combining that with embroidery, and very inspired by quilting too. Recently saw a show at RISD, the student exhibition there, and there was a quilt from Gee's Bend in Alabama. And it's a really beautiful form of quilting where it's, again, like it's kind of Depression era style quilting, using little tiny scraps of flour sacks or t-shirts or whatever, and really beautiful, sometimes congruent patterns, or very abstract. It's kind of what's been coming up for me right now.
It's so beautiful that you mentioned quilts, because something that I thought about while looking at the cake you're making now and also looking at your paintings is that a quilt can be seen from so many directions. You can keep turning it, and there's not a single view of a quilt. It changes from the person on whom it's lying on. It changes as you approach the bed the quilt might be on. Even as you're making it, you can keep moving it. And we're watching you do the same thing with the cake. The composition is one that's in motion, especially on the round, but also because you are moving around as you're working, it'll change in how each slice is cut afterwards. I see it also in your paintings, which seem like paintings that you can walk around and work on from different angles. Is that something you, and now we have so many questions, you can tell me briefly, is
Yeah,
that something that you find liberating, or is that, yeah, what is that kind of framing for you?
I do think it's interesting you're saying that. I mean, something that, you know, I I was doing, but then when I was in culinary school, when we were taught how, making wedding cakes, is that you should be able to view it from every angle and be impressed, rather than it being so, what would be two-dimensional, one-dimensional, where it's just like, that's it. But
Hmm.
you should be able to walk around the whole thing and it should be exciting. Yeah. And that does seem like a through line. I haven't ever connected that to quilting, but it makes a lot of sense, because it's something I'm constantly thinking of how does it from every angle.
Hmm. Thank you, Olivia. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we have a lot of questions,
Yes.
and let's see. So let's see. So where do you source your local and seasonal ingredients from, and do you have a garden yourself?
Where I'm at in Richmond, we have a lot of different great farmers markets, and even throughout the winter, there's a couple that stay open. So I'm always checking in with them. And then there's a couple farms that you can just drive out to. So that's where I'm sourcing things. Also, some friends who have big gardens will let me know if they have extras of something, or a big tree that's fruiting or flowering that they know I would love to use. And then I also do have a garden. I primarily grow flowers and herbs. I don't get a lot of enough sunlight for vegetables, so I focus on flowers and herbs, and that way I'm able to control, what's sprayed on the flowers or whatever, so that when I'm able to use them on cakes, I think there was a question about being the flowers edible, and I always try to do edible or non-toxic flowers as decor on the cake.
Do you, with your paintings, do you sell them, or do you, and also like the other artworks are you making, or is this like a more private practice, which is, for your own self? How do you think about them?
It depends. Sometimes if I have a show, and I've had a couple in the past, I am, painting them as it being a cohesive experience. And then, the hope is that I would sell them. I also do commissioned painting. So someone will show me a place in their house where they would like a painting, and they'll be like, paint whatever. Um, and on my website, I will have things listed on there, but also if anyone's interested, they just can contact me directly. And then sometimes if I'm just wanting to experiment, like right now I'm working on a few different pieces, but it's really just to see where I'm at right now. And I'm painting with, intention of learning something, or just getting something out of me.
I mean, I guess similar to this is another question here, which asked, and maybe this is the reverse on the cake side, is what's the last thing you baked which was just for yourself with no order or deadline attached?
I made a rhubarb and custard pie a couple weeks ago, and that was because, it's rhubarb season, and it's a very, talk about ephemeral, it's a very like fleeting vegetable that I really love, and it's a beautiful pink color. But I didn't have quite a lot of orders, and I didn't want to do a pop-up, and I hadn't made a pie in a while. So I think pies are a great like activity to do if you're just wanting to do something nice for yourself or for bring to a party, because it's kind of long. It takes, 3 to 5 hours, or sometimes 2 days, depending on the chilling time. And but that's the last thing I made for myself with, no selling involved.
When you're making a custom cake, so the question is, when you're making a custom cake, do you think of it more as cooking or art? But I also maybe want to ask you, for you, I guess, what is the feeling that makes an action the action of art making versus not? Or is that even true for you, that something isn't art?
I recently, I think in the past couple years, started to understand a little bit better how like a cake like this is art. I think, and my first priority with making cake or cooking is on the flavor and the taste. That is, if it doesn't taste good, there's nothing, like, what's the point, But I also think cooking and baking with layering flavors and pairing flavors, I do think that is a form of an art practice in of itself. But I'm kind of new to that thinking. It's taken me, I think, since I've stepped out of the restaurant industry a little bit, it's taken me a couple years to kind of work through that. So something I'm new to in terms of thinking of it like that.
Do you think, or maybe because I think this has always been an interesting question for me for any number of things. Is when something becomes an art, is that like it transcending, or is it something that almost all of us can experience if we pay attention to something? And I'm wondering, is there a difference in the quality of your attention, or what you think about as you are making these cakes now versus when you worked in a more like high stress kitchen?
I think my I think I'm much closer to the customer than I ever have been. with what I'm doing now versus in a restaurant, you're pretty far because, you know, I wasn't front of house, I wasn't serving, I was in the kitchen, and I wasn't really getting that one-on-one interaction. And it's now what I'm doing and have been doing for the past 6 years is very, very intimate and very personal. And that's been an interesting kind of learning curve for me to get a hold of and find boundaries within too. It can be tricky.
Okay, here's another question, and we perhaps have time for maybe one or two more questions. So if you have any, send them over. Who are your favorite bakers? And have you ever made, I guess these are three questions. Who are your favorite bakers? Have you ever made a Russian honey cake? And do you like it?
Some of my favorite bakers. Oh, that's so tough. I think, you know, there's really talented people really nearby me in Richmond. Aveen and Evram of Sabrosa make beautiful, beautiful breads and pastries. My friend Janie makes beautiful bread. I have a friend in New York. Her name's Paige Nichols. She makes beautiful confections like bonbons and chocolates and is very, very focused on the flavor with them. Very inspired by her. And then, you know, some like classic pastry and chefs. Pierre Hermé, who's a famous French pastry chef, has been around for so long. And he's another person where you can tell that the flavors are very, very important, but then it's like your classic French technique and very elegant, is also inspiring to me and was informative in my early years as a baker.
Do you
Oh, the Russian honey cake. I
yes.
have made it and I love it. It's so delicious. Yes.
Do you I'll have to look this up. I have never tasted one. So I
So good. Yeah.
I guess here's another question. And this we can share, Olivia, if you can also share with us where your Substack, and I wonder if there's a way to share with the people who are on this in this conversation with us, Olivia's website, Substack, and Instagram. There is a question earlier about, and this is a cake order, is whether your cakes can be ordered to another state. That's one. That's one question. And Olivia, you can share your information also in the chat itself.
Okay. I have not shipped cakes before. I would be too nervous to do that. I think it would be complicated. And like the fresh flowers, I don't think they travel well. But I have shipped like chocolates and other types of treats before. And I have done like online workshops, so that's also not the same, but you know.
I've seen, speaking of chocolate, and someone also asked about this. I've seen you, like, it's around Valentine's Day, do these like little tiny chocolate fish, or like things that are more portable. Can you talk about how that came about, and also what are those fish?
The fish are called gianduja fish, and I had this idea around the holidays because I do a lot of markets, and sometimes the markets are early December before Christmas. And there's a lot of, I'm usually the only food vendor there. It's mostly, you know, craftspeople, and, you know, people are shopping for gifts. So it's like, what can I make that would still be good by Christmas, which would be like 2 weeks after the market? And chocolate is very shelf stable. And, you know, I love miniature things, and I love just savory tinned fish. But gianduja fish, I make a homemade gianduja, which is hails from the Piemonte region in Italy. And it was invented to, back, you know, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago, maybe, or maybe longer, stretch the cacao that they had by making a hazelnut paste, because around them hazelnuts grew plentifully. So they stretched the cacao with hazelnuts. So essentially I make my own gianduja by making a sweetened hazelnut paste with hazelnuts from Piemonte, and then a dark chocolate, and then sea salt. And then they're molded into little tiny fish with like some edible shimmer that's on top. And then they come in a small little tin. And that way people can reuse the tin they're great for traveling. But yeah, they were developed so that they could be a shelf stable gift around the holidays for a market.
I really hope to taste one of them one of these days.
Yes.
We are at time, but I have one last question for you, Olivia, for us
Okay.
before we leave, and that is, I know that the work of an artist, whatever we is, sometimes can be a lot of long, lonely hours by ourselves, where we are, whether you're icing the cake or whether you're painting, and are there how I want to know what the sonic quality of that time is. Are you listening to things? Are you listening to music? Are you listening to books? Are you listening to the radio? Are you talking to a friend? Or are you quiet? What is that time like for you?
I think the longer I've been doing this in a solitary fashion, the more of everything it has become. I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, and then I realized it was too stimulating. And so we have a record player in our kitchen. So sometimes I find that's really lovely to have like an analog thing where I'm not just also AirPods hurt my ears. So um sometimes I'll put on like an old movie in the background, or I'll listen to a record, or sometimes it's just quiet and I'll have the windows open. And as of late, I have been more into the quiet because there's so much going on inside of my head that sometimes just having it be like a visual and physical action and without more stimulation has been more peaceful.
I agree. I agree. It's rarer and rarer to have time that is just focused or is rich but single. So that's lovely, and it's been very lovely to also watch you make this cake as we're chatting and watching it in this world, and perhaps we can. There we go. There are those kiwis at the bottom.
Yeah, here. See. Kiwis and cherry blossoms, tulips, and little like gooseberries, golden tomatoes. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Lucky mother and future baby, I suppose.
She's here. The baby's here.
Baby's here. The baby's arrived.
Yeah.
It's
And
been so
the middle name is Blossom of the baby. So
perfect.
with all the spring blossoms, I thought it'd be nice. So
Perfect. Wow, thank you so much, Olivia. It's been so nice to chat with you. And we have Olivia's website here, olivia-wilson.com. And then Olivia's Substack is substack.com/at Olive Major, which is what I've been calling Olivia for the longest time in my mind, Olive Major, which is also her Instagram handle, one of the most a really pleasurable Instagram to look at. Thank you so much, Olivia. It was so lovely to chat with you, and I just feel lucky that you're within this vicinity where I am, and I don't have to go too far to see you. Thank you.
thank you
Um,
so
and,
much. It's so great.
and thank you to everyone who is tuning in and, looking forward to seeing you again.
Yes. Love from Virginia.